Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere high, up where the air is sharp and clean, and the roofs are older than your great grandma's sarcasm. Nestled among jagged peaks and clattering cowbells, there's a quiet village that builds its houses not beside old ruins, but directly on top of them. Not just once, but again and again, like layer cake with questionable zoning laws. Imagine walking into your neighbor's kitchen and realizing you're 2 stories above what used to be their living room. From 1623. There's a kind of quiet madness in that, right? You probably won't survive this place if you're allergic to ancient dust, steep stairs, or buildings that lean suspiciously left. But if you're like me and a sucker for weird geography and homes with a past life crisis, you're in the right dream. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start at the edge of a stone path, mossy and uneven, where every cobble feels like it remembers your footsteps before you take them. In front of you, a row of homes with thick wooden beams, steep slate roofs, and shuttered windows that look permanently suspicious. The whole village feels like it was stitched together by someone who ran out of thread and just started reusing old seams. Here's the first thing to understand. This isn't just an old village. This is a vertical village. A place where history doesn't stretch out, it stacks up. Imagine if every time your roof collapsed, you didn't tear the house down. You just cleaned up the worst of it, flattened the rubble, and started building again, slightly higher than before. You're looking at what geographers call an accretion settlement, not a ruin, not a preserved site, a living, breathing, firewood stacked on the chimney, teenager sulking in the attic kind of place, but one that's built like a millefeuille pastry. Thin layers of eras, compressed into the height of a small apartment block. One house has 6 doorways. Only one still works. The others hang slightly above ground like haunted leftovers from a more convenient century. And it's not just this one house. The whole village is like that. Streets don't go straight. They dip and rise like waves, because some homes sit on their 3rd foundation, while others are barely on their 2nd. From a drone's eye view, or, let's be honest, a particularly adventurous goat's, it looks like a game of Tetris being played by someone who's never read the rules. Some sections of road just stop. Not because of construction, because the original street was buried 100 years ago, and the next one was built on top, right over the roofs of forgotten homes. You pass a window with flower boxes blooming wildly in defiance of gravity, and you realize the window is at eye level, but it used to be at chest height when the house was built. Either the villagers are shrinking or the land's playing tricks. Spoiler, it's both. There's a mainstream explanation for all this, of course. Alpine geography isn't kind. It never was. With little flat space to expand, and the ever-present threat of landslides, avalanches, and long winters with not much to do. Accept carve wood or rebuild your neighbor's cowshed. The people here made a decision. It's easier to build up than start over. Especially when starting over means hauling stones up a mountain, again. But the quirky bit is this. They didn't just reuse the land. They reused everything. Old beams become floor joists. Broken tiles get patched into chimney caps. Once, they found a 14th century baker's oven in what had become someone's root cellar, still full of soot, and a single petrified bun, probably still better than airplane food. Scientists still argue over whether this form of construction was strategic, cultural, or just a long-running accident everyone's too polite to fix. Was it about preserving tradition, a side effect of feudal land rights, or just stubborn practicality dressed up as architectural heritage? Whatever the reason, it worked. The village didn't die out. It compacted, like memory foam for civilizations. And now you're standing on a cobbled lane, running your fingers along a wall that feels strangely warm, because it was built to trap heat in a time when winters laughed at insulation. You lean in and smell smoke, faint and woody, like someone just lit a fire in 1731. A nearby sign, painted by hand and slightly tilted, says something about cheese. Of course it does. This is the Alps after all. As the evening deepens, the village doesn't quiet down. It settles into itself. The shadows stretch across window panes that were fitted 3 centuries ago and never quite square. A cat slips through a crack in a wall where time eroded the mortar, but no one ever bothered to fix it because the mice still know better. You pass a door that leads to nothing, just a sheer drop into brambles and memory. Another door stands 3 feet above the ground with no stairs leading up, just a broom leaning patiently. A sense of time sits heavy here, but it doesn't press down. It stacks. That's the odd grace of this place. Each generation didn't erase the one before. It just added a new chapter on top. Not even always better, just newer, warmer maybe, or less likely to catch fire, but not new in the way we think of it. More like an old sweater, turned inside out, and worn again because the sleeves still work, and the holes are mostly decorative. And that's where we leave this first step, just outside a door that doesn't open anymore, halfway up a wall that used to be ground level, in a village that believes every stone has another story to support. You're still in that narrow street, remember? The one with the crooked windows and the cat that vanished through history. Good. Now take a few steps forward and look down. No, really, look closely at the path beneath your feet. It's not just dirt and gravel. It's time, compressed into paving stones. The idea of stacking time like firewood sounds poetic until you realize how literal it gets here. Each generation of villagers didn't just occupy the space. They contributed to it. Collapsed roofs became tomorrow's garden terraces. Crumbling walls were pulled down and folded neatly into the new floor. When a house sagged beyond saving, they didn't knock it all down. They leveled what remained, poured a new base over the top, and began again. Like sourdough starters or family gossip, the village grew in layers, half preserved, half improvised, wholly accidental. This practice has a name in archaeology: stratified habitation. Most often, it's found in cities where long-term occupation piles up into neat, datable slices of civilization. Rome, Istanbul, Cairo, those are your big-ticket examples. But here, high in the Alps, the same logic applies. It's just homier, less imperial grandeur, more cheese knives and wooden spoons. Instead of marble temples, it's cowsheds. Instead of Roman baths, it's a room where 5 generations stored potatoes. And yet somehow, it's just as rich. The quirky twist: this kind of building on top habit means the village floor rises over time, literally. That explains the weird doors. why some windows are barely above the ground, while others hang uselessly above your head. It explains why new residents occasionally open what they think is a pantry door, only to discover stairs descending into someone else's century. Scientists still argue over when exactly this practice began. Some say it dates to the late medieval period, when timber became scarce and transportation difficult. Others argue that it stretches back even further, to Roman settlements that quietly evolved into mountain hamlets once the legions packed up and left. But no one's certain, because honestly, it's hard to study a history that's still being lived on top of. Now picture this. You step inside one of these homes. The front door is arched stone, worn smooth from hands that knocked before you were born. Inside, it's warm and quiet. There's a wood stove breathing gently in the corner. And the walls are thick, like bunker thick. That's because the bottom layer of this house is 2 centuries older than the roof. You're not in a home, you're in a sandwich of eras. The grandmother who lives here smiles as she stirs soup and tells you casually that her kitchen floor used to be her father's ceiling. We didn't like the drafts, she says, so we built new walls above the old ones. Now it's warmer, fewer ghosts. You smile politely, but you're still staring at the ceiling because there's a weird rectangular outline up there. Could it be an old window, a trapdoor, a misplaced portal to 1843? That's the thing. Nothing here is wasted. Even error has purpose. A broken stair becomes a shelf. A collapsed hearth is converted into a root cellar. Some villagers have entire rooms beneath their homes they no longer use, but they don't seal them off. They leave them there, like memories with wallpaper. In one case, a family discovered their home rested on top of an old blacksmith's forge. They kept the original stone floor and turned it into a wine cellar, because of course they did. Cold, dark, slightly haunted. It's the Alpine way. Even mainstream geography acknowledges that mountainous regions force architectural improvisation. In flatter landscapes, you knock down, cart away, rebuild. But here, that's expensive. Hauling debris downhill is dangerous. And building fresh on untouched land means battling uneven ground, sudden frost, and the occasional goat with attitude. It's easier, and oddly more sustainable, to just use what's already underfoot. But it's not just a practicality. There's something emotional in it too. A kind of unspoken reverence. When you build your bedroom on top of where your great-great-grandmother gave birth, you're not just reusing space. You're embedding your life into a longer narrative. You're saying, we were here before, and we're still here now. Not all layers are clean, of course. Some come from disaster. Avalanches, floods, and landslides often bury whole structures. And instead of unearthing them, villagers just shovel the worst aside and rebuild. The remains get folded into the new plan. A corner of a stone wall becomes the base of a fireplace. A bent iron gate ends up as part of a staircase railing. One village pub boasts a support beam that used to be part of a chapel ceiling. Holyoke now holding up beer. You can still feel it, even in the air. The scent of old timber, cold stone, and something else. Something like wax and dust, maybe even time itself. As you step outside again, you notice a strange detail. The rooftops here are not all the same height. And it's not because of hills or fancy designs. It's because every home has a different number of layers beneath it. One family rebuilt 3 times. Their neighbor, 7. It's the architectural equivalent of a family tree with half the branches hidden underground. It's not hard to imagine a version of this village floating in the clouds, getting taller with each generation, eventually brushing the bellies of passing birds. And yet, for all the complexity beneath the surface, life here remains simple. The postman still makes deliveries on foot. The baker still uses firewood. Children still play in alleys that curve unpredictably because they follow no rational plan, just the spine of whatever lies underneath. Back in the square, someone sweeps their doorstep, but you notice they're sweeping uphill because their doorstep isn't ground level anymore. It's shoulder height. The new ground is just a polite fiction. Everyone here knows the true village is beneath your feet, stacked like firewood, waiting to be remembered. You duck slightly as you pass through another warped doorway, half from habit, half because you're not entirely convinced this arch won't shed dust in protest. Inside, the air is cooler. It smells like stone and something sweeter, maybe dried thyme or very old apples. You've entered a home that feels like a time capsule, but not one that was sealed away. One that's been quietly lived in, over and over, until the past just became part of the furniture. Beneath your feet, there's more than a floor. There's a story. What's wild is that in some of these alpine homes, you're not just stepping into history, you're stepping on top of it. In several houses throughout the region, locals have unearthed foundations from medieval dwellings, sometimes even Roman ones. And instead of removing them, they built directly over. No time for excavation. You work with what you're given, even if what you're given includes a partial aqueduct in your pantry. Picture this. The current living room was 2 centuries ago a smithy's workshop. Before that, a food storage pit. Before that, a one-room hut belonging to someone who wore wool leggings and never brushed their teeth. One home revealed a bone-handled knife wedged into a foundation stone, so old its style predated the village itself. The owner cleaned it, mounted it on a plaque, and now uses it to slice bread at dinner parties. Classy. Underneath the existing floors lie wooden beams scorched black by fire, stonework repaired and patched with methods no modern builder recognizes, and the occasional ceramic button that belonged to someone who got lost in the 1700s and just never left. Families often stumble upon forgotten rooms while replacing plumbing, suddenly finding themselves in what used to be a chapel alcove or a Cooper's barrel store. The most dramatic find in recent years? A young couple restoring their kitchen floor uncovered human remains beneath the substructure, neatly arranged, wrapped in wool cloth. It was, they discovered later, a family crypt, right under the eggs and sugar jar. You'd think this would be alarming, but in the Alps, it's practically a rite of passage, because while modern zoning boards would faint at the idea, this is how alpine architecture evolves, not by clearing, but by absorbing. When the old roof caves in, the debris isn't carted away. It becomes the new insulation. When walls collapse, their stones are sorted, selected, and placed right back in, with the care of someone folding linens for winter. And when foundations sink, they don't fight it. They just build a new one, higher, stronger, on top. Scientists still argue about how this layering process affects structural integrity. One camp claims the sheer mass makes these homes resilient, especially in a region prone to seismic tremors and landslides. Another group mutters darkly about moisture, mold, and carbon monoxide traps. And then there's the third group, local grandmothers, who will simply tell you, if it hasn't fallen yet, it's good enough. And they're right. In one house, the floorboards creak in Morse code. but the walls haven't budged in 300 years. One stone cottage, built partially on a Roman villa's remnants, hasn't needed a new foundation since Napoleon was in diapers. It's not uncommon for a single room to contain 3 separate floor levels, each a response to an event no one alive remembers. A partial flood? Raise the floor a few inches. A fire in 1811? Add beams? Patch the smoke-stained corners? Forget it ever happened. That weird spring where the cows kept wandering inside? Stone the base and call it a cellar. There's a term some local masons use, Hausgedächtnis, literally house memory. It refers not just to the physical record kept in the materials, but the way homes here seem to remember their own changes. A niche in the wall no one uses anymore, a seam in the plaster that once divided 2 rooms, a carved initial above a doorframe, weathered to invisibility, but still there. And then there's the practice of leaving things behind. Villagers often tuck a coin, a carved figurine, or even a scrap of embroidered cloth into the seams of new construction. Tiny offerings to the structure, to those who'll live in it next. Superstition? Maybe. But it's also a kind of message in a bottle. A way to say, we were here. We mattered. Build on us gently. Mainstream historians often marvel at how consistent this practice is, even across different countries. Similar stacked villages exist in parts of Italy, Austria, and Slovenia, but the Alps offer a particularly vivid example. Because here, the margin between survival and hardship has always been thin. To live meant to adapt, and to adapt meant to build smart, or build again. You wander into what appears to be a sitting room, but it's oddly low-ceilinged, almost bunker-like. The owner explains that this used to be the entire house, a one-room stone hut, heated by a single fire. Above you, 2 stories of additions now hum with modern life. But down here, it's like sitting in a history book, still open to the chapter where they learned how to keep warm. The fireplace hasn't been used in decades, but the walls are soot-darkened, the air slightly smoky, as though the stones themselves remember the chill. There's a chair in the corner, older than your country, and on it a cushion that's been restuffed so many times it may now be more stuffing than original thread. You spot a tiny wooden door in the corner. When asked, the owner shrugs. We don't open that. My grandfather said it goes nowhere. Naturally, you open it. Behind the door, stairs, stone, winding, terrifyingly narrow, leading down. You descend halfway before realizing you're now standing in what looks like the remains of a grain storage pit, or a wine cellar, or maybe a forgotten prayer chamber. Hard to say. There's a fresco on one wall, faded but unmistakable. An angel with 3 fingers raised, warning or blessing, or maybe just trying to count the centuries. Upstairs, the soup is ready, because life moves on. It always has. The bones, the bricks, the buried tools, they're all still here. Not behind museum glass, just underfoot. A little dusty, a little damp, and absolutely unbothered by the fact that the kitchen now sits on their shoulders. The next morning, you stretch, step out onto the narrow balcony of your guest room, and breathe in the sharp alpine air. It tastes like pine and yesterday's chimney smoke. Far below, the village is stirring. Soft footsteps on stone. A dog barking once and deciding it's not worth the energy. The faint clatter of someone moving firewood. But your attention drifts downward to the strangest thing of all, the ground itself. Because, spoiler, it's not where it used to be. This village has been gently, stubbornly, rising for hundreds of years. Not like a skyscraper, but more like a time lapse of someone stacking books without ever taking any away. Today's ground level is often several meters above what it was centuries ago. And the reason is charmingly chaotic. The villagers themselves keep piling things on, literally. In some parts of the world, sediment builds up slowly from floods or dust storms. Here, it's more like a combination of construction rubble, fire debris, repurposed thatch, broken furniture, and the odd layer of avalanche detritus. It's less sediment and more alpine lasagna. Dense, rich, and always homemade. Imagine this. A roof collapses in a snowstorm, and the owners do what alpine folk do best. They salvage what's usable, leave the rest, and build a smaller, warmer home right on top. Over the decades, that leftover layer gets walked on, built into, or simply forgotten. Then their kids do the same, and their kids. Before long, the original foundation is a memory deep below your socks. Geographers call this phenomenon cultural stratigraphy, but it's a bit like composting with history. Bits of broken tools, splinters of furniture, bones from long-forgotten Sunday dinners. It all settles into a thick, chaotic layer between generations. Walk through a village square, and chances are you're stepping on 1,000 ordinary yesterdays. One house in the village had its doorway measured every decade since the 1800s. What started as a 3-step climb became 2 steps, then 1, then level with the street, and now you step down into it. A sunken front door swallowed by time. That same street used to slope gently downhill. Now it hitches and bumps, curving around buildings like a stream around stubborn rocks. It's not a planned elevation, just the architectural equivalent of shrugging and saying, close enough. And here's a quirky twist. Villagers often don't realize how high they've gotten until they try to dig a garden or repair a wall. You'll hear stories of someone trying to plant potatoes and finding roof tiles 2 feet down. One man, installing plumbing for a new bathroom, uncovered a cobblestone courtyard buried directly beneath his house, complete with an iron drain and the skeleton of a chicken. It wasn't his courtyard or his chicken. Scientists still argue whether this gradual elevation is a form of passive design or just a happy accident of rural stubbornness. Is it tradition? Is it laziness? Is it clever long-term planning disguised as forgetfulness? The answer, like most things in the Alps, depends on who you ask and how many generations their family's been arguing about it. But there's a poetic side to it. The rising dirt is a record of sorts. Every uneven paving stone, every buried beam, is part of a long, slow conversation between the village and the mountain. It says, we're still here, and we're not cleaning up. Of course, there are some less romantic consequences. Drainage becomes a guessing game. Basements, when they still exist, are often sealed off due to water intrusion, rot, or the fact that nobody wants to deal with the ghost of a monk that allegedly haunts the original root cellar. One family installed a modern refrigerator in a room that used to be part of the village well. It lasted 6 months before they gave up and turned it into a wine rack. At least the wine appreciated the cool. The most visible symptom of the rising ground? The doorways. Everywhere you go, you notice the awkward entries. Doors high off the ground, needing ladders or stairs to access. Others so low they feel more like mouse holes than entrances. Some villagers simply sealed the old ones off. and carved out new ones higher up. The old doors remain, relics embedded in stone, decorated with flower pots or holiday wreaths, quietly watching over a world that has climbed past them. You pass a house with 3 separate doors, each one representing a different century's idea of street level. The bottom one's half buried in grass and gravel, now used as a tool shed. The middle door opens into the living room. The top one, it's new, sort of. Added by the great-granddaughter of the original owner, it now serves as the main entrance because the path outside had quietly risen over decades like a tide. The villagers, for their part, don't seem to mind. They adjust. Stairs get built. Thresholds shift. Kids grow up hopping over ancient doorframes like it's a game. When asked if it's inconvenient, one elderly man just shrugs and says, "Only when the mailman's new." And let's talk about cemeteries. Yes, even the dead have been pulled upward, in a way. In some alpine graveyards, headstones now appear at odd angles because the soil beneath them has subtly climbed or shifted from years of snowpack and human layering. Some tombs are now oddly shallow, not because they've been disturbed, but because the surface rose to meet them. One churchyard had to be re-leveled twice in the past century to avoid confusing visiting mourners who kept tripping over someone else's 18th century toe marker. Back on the village street, you walk past a bakery that's technically on the second floor, but no one says that out loud. The old ground floor is now used for flour storage, sealed off with a half-rotted door. The baker says he's never opened it. It groans, he says. Let sleeping cellars lie. All of this, the rising dirt, the layered homes, the ghost doors, it creates a place that feels suspended between worlds. You're not walking through a village. You're wading through time, slowly, deliberately, like wandering inside a snow globe where each flake is a year someone didn't quite clean up. And somehow, against all logic, it works. The buildings lean, but don't fall. The streets twist, but still connect. The villagers joke about living upstairs from their ancestors, but they mean it. There's something deeply comforting in that. So next time you find yourself cursing a creaky floorboard or an uneven stoop, just remember, some people live 3 floors above where their great-great-grandmother once churned butter, and they're just fine with it. Now let's go someplace even more intimate, the kitchen, or rather, what's currently the kitchen. Because here in the Alps, rooms tend to shift purposes over generations. A pantry becomes a bedroom becomes an attic becomes an oddly echoey office where no one likes to sit after dark. But one thing never changes. Underneath it all, something older lingers. And sometimes, it's family. In many of these alpine homes, the foundations aren't just made of stone and timber. They're made of memory, and quite literally, bones. You step into a warm kitchen, kettle whistling gently, soup bubbling on a stovetop that looks like it's been in use since World War I, and it probably has. The floorboards are thick pine, uneven, with a soft creak that sounds like a lullaby for old houses. You imagine dropping a spoon. It might roll under the stove and land in 1783. Beneath your feet, there's more than dirt. There's lineage, because here, under these homes, it's not unusual to find family crypts, small burial chambers, or even single graves tucked carefully beneath the structure. These aren't hidden nor secret, so much as known, accepted, part of the blueprint. You might think, Wait, they buried people under their houses? Yes. But before you clutch your pillow tighter, know this wasn't about horror. It was about proximity. It was about continuity. See, when space is scarce and mountains refuse to move aside for your cemetery, families do the next best thing. They bury loved ones under the very home they built, homes that sheltered, fed, and raised those same people. It wasn't morbid, it was meaningful, a full circle completed under the hearth. Sometimes it's formal, stone-lined chambers with carved initials, carefully preserved. Sometimes it's more improvisational, a shallow resting place wrapped in wool and sealed beneath the floorboards during a particularly harsh winter. Scientists still debate how widespread this practice truly was. Some argue it was limited to extreme conditions. Others say it was far more common, just rarely documented because it was never considered unusual. To these villagers, it wasn't newsworthy. It was Tuesday. You pass through another room, a cellar dimly lit, where the air is heavier and cooler. A space built to store apples and potatoes. But if you listen closely, the silence feels older, a hollow sort of quiet, the kind that makes your ears feel full. One homeowner remembers digging a drainage trench beneath their property and uncovering 3 slate tablets, stacked neatly. At first, they thought they were old flooring slabs, until they noticed one was engraved, with a name, a date, and a cross. They reburied it gently, then built a wine rack above it, because life and wine must go on. Here's the quirky part. Not all of these buried individuals were placed there by family choice. In some cases, whole sections of earlier settlements lie beneath current homes. Entire communities wiped out by avalanche or disease, later rebuilt over as the village recovered. You may be baking scones in a kitchen that stands atop what was once a blacksmith's cottage, and before that, a funeral parlor. And before that, no one's quite sure. The records turned to ash somewhere around 1430. That's the paradox of this village. The past doesn't linger behind you. It lingers below you. You lean against a wooden countertop, looking out the window at a flock of birds making loops around the chimney tops. The woman beside you, probably in her 80s, offers you a mug of something warm. She tells you that her mother's mother is buried beneath the larder. Not under the butter, she adds with a wink. We have standards. Mainstream geography rarely mentions this layering of the personal and structural. They'll tell you about tectonic uplift, glacial carving, or soil erosion. But they won't mention the quiet domestic topography of grief management by architecture. Because this practice wasn't always about death, it was also about staying put, about refusing to give up land when the ground itself shifted or froze or cracked. The family stayed, the memories stayed, and the homes adapted. There's a superstition, passed down in murmurs, that says it's good luck to have an ancestor beneath your floor. Protects the house from rot and ruin, a kind of spiritual insulation. Some villagers even tuck small relics, locks of hair, rosary beads, carved wooden birds, into the joists, just in case a ghost gets bored and decides to knock. It's not spooky exactly. It's practical, personal, rooted. One older man tells you his home sits on the remnants of 4 family generations. He jokes that he can still hear his great-grandfather grumble when the wine is bad. You smile, half amused, half unsure. But then the wind picks up outside, and the wooden beams above creak in reply. Just once. And you find yourself listening a little harder. As night falls, You leave the warmth of the kitchen and step into the chill hallway. On one wall is a framed drawing. The house as it looked a century ago. Smaller, simpler, a single chimney, a low roof. Today it has 3 floors and a bathroom that complains in multiple languages. But underneath, the same stone, the same bones. You press your hand to the wall. It's cool, solid, ancient. You wonder how many people touched this same spot, said the same things, cooked the same meals, maybe even dropped a spoon in the same place. Here in the Alps, the past isn't something you visit. It's something you stand on, something that holds you up, literally. And maybe that's the real comfort of this strange architectural layering. You're never far from your roots, even if they whisper from under your feet. Outside, the sun is high and bright, but the air has that crisp alpine edge that sneaks up behind your ears and makes you rethink your jacket choices. You're walking now, carefully, along a narrow trail above the village, and you pause to look back. The rooftops shimmer like slate fish scales. Pretty, peaceful, ancient. Then, without warning, a loud thunk echoes through the valley. Don't worry, it's not war. It's probably snow. Because one of the greatest and most inconvenient architectural consultants in alpine history is gravity. Specifically, avalanches, mudslides, rockfalls, and every other way the mountain reminds you who's boss. Here's the reality. Building in the Alps is an act of optimism with a pinch of defiance. And sometimes that defiance gets flattened. You can ask any local, and they'll tell you entire sections of their village have been wiped out by natural disasters more than once. Not figuratively flattened, actually buried. Entire homes, inns, churches, gone in a single winter's sigh. And the response from the villagers? Build again, right on top. Not out of laziness, not entirely, but because when your land is limited and your ancestors are buried 6 feet below the living room, relocating isn't the obvious choice. So when a mudslide barrels through in 1820, folks shovel, sweep, patch, and rebuild right there, 1 level higher than before. Sometimes, the debris from the disaster becomes part of the new construction. Charred beams from a lightning-struck house repurposed into rafters. Stones from a collapsed barn turned into foundations. A particularly well-preserved avalanche site once revealed a row of roof lines completely encased in snowpack, still intact, like they'd been sealed in frosting. Today, that site, someone's goat pen. Scientists still debate how long it takes for disaster layers to stabilize enough to build on. Some claim a few years is sufficient. Others argue for decades. Villagers? They wait until it stops smoking, then get to work. The mountain's done yelling, one man says, patting the side of his new garage. One of the oddest truths about this geography is that many villages are, technically, built on ruins of themselves, not because of conquest or neglect, but because Mother Nature sneezed in their direction. A famous case involves a cluster of houses destroyed in a 19th century avalanche. Instead of abandoning the site, the villagers leveled what remained, carted off the truly mangled parts, and filled the rest with earth. They used the new plateau as a foundation for a school. That school still stands today, slightly tilted, occasionally haunted, but standing. And that tilt? It's not an accident. It's baked into the region's architectural DNA. Homes here lean, walls bow, floors slope like they're trying to discreetly leave the room. Not because the builders were careless, but because they were adapting, to a landscape that literally shifts beneath them. To mitigate future disasters, homes are often built with sloped stone bases that allow snow to slide off. Roofs are steep, eaves minimal. And in older structures, you'll sometimes find doors facing away from the usual wind direction because wind brings snow and snow brings problems. Still, the layers remain. Avalanches leave scars, but they also leave shelter. That's the strange part. When snow covers a ruined home, it insulates it, preserves it. In some cases, it slows decay so thoroughly that later generations can recover usable materials. One young woman recounted how her family found an entire cedar wardrobe inside the basement of a home that had been buried for nearly a century. Still smelled like lavender, still locked. The mudslides are trickier, less romantic, more viscous. When the ground turns to soup, homes get swallowed, walls collapse, wooden beams twist into soft spirals like pasta boiled too long. But even then, the villagers don't flee. They clean. They bless the earth with strong language. Then they begin again. The quirky twist. In several homes, residents built new floors directly over old ceilings, flattening roofs and reusing them as base layers. Some attic beams still hold soot marks from a fire that occurred 2 rebuilds ago. One innkeeper proudly shows guests a support beam in his bar that bears the initials MJ 1712, carved by a man who, according to family legend, was half blind and fully drunk when he did it. The beam survived 3 roof collapses. MJ remains, slightly crooked and completely unbothered. There's an ancient phrase used in this region, bouwen ist erinner'n. To build is to remember. Not in the poetic sense, in the literal sense. Every home here is a record of what happened before. You don't erase disasters. You build them into the walls. This philosophy doesn't stop with private homes. Even public spaces bear the marks. The village fountain, rebuilt 5 times. But instead of removing the previous ones, the new fountains were constructed directly over them. You can still see their outlines in the stone, like fossilized water. You pass a low building with curved stone walls and a slate roof barely 5 feet tall. It looks like a hobbit garage. Turns out, it used to be the village schoolhouse, until a snowdrift turned it into a basement. Today it serves as storage for sleds, salt, and probably a few unexamined ghosts. Above it, a new school, higher, brighter, still oddly drafty. One elderly woman recalls an avalanche that took out her family's barn when she was a child. She remembers digging through snow as her father shouted her name. He wasn't worried. He just wanted her to help him find the good rake. 2 days later, they'd cleared a space and begun laying new beams. The barn was back up before spring thaw. That's the rhythm here. Not resilience in the Instagram sense, but the old kind. The kind that doesn't need a motivational quote. Just a shovel and a ladder. Even the animals seem used to it. Cows blink slowly when mudslides change the shape of their paddocks. Goats treat collapsed stone walls like climbing gyms. One donkey simply refuses to enter the 3rd stable built for him. He liked the first one best, his owner sighs. And through all this, the layers grow, higher, thicker, wiser. Every floor you walk on is not the first. Every window looks out from a different era. And somewhere below, in the quiet dark, yesterday's village waits, flattened but never forgotten. So the next time you hear snow rumble in the distance, or watch a gutter strain beneath the weight of slush, think of these homes, of these people, and of how, here in the Alps, disaster is never the end. It's just the start of another story, laid gently on top of the last. Let's duck back inside now. Not for safety, but for the scent. You step through a carved wooden door and instantly feel it. A moist, earthy chill curling around your ankles. The room is dark, lit only by a single swinging bulb and the faintest sliver of daylight from a tiny window pressed up against a snowbank. The air smells unmistakably fermented. Welcome to the Alpine Cellar, or more precisely, the cheese-scented underworld. Because in this village of stacked homes, the lower levels aren't just structural leftovers. They're living spaces in their own right. Cold rooms where history ages right alongside the Emmental. And it's not always clear which came first, the cheese or the stone. You're standing in a room built on top of another room, which was built on top of another life. This cellar, mossy, sloped, with strange grooves in the flagstones, was once a forge. Before that, a livestock pen. Today, it stores wheels of aging cheese that smell like someone bottled centuries and forgot to use a cork. The walls sweat slightly in the corners, beads of moisture collecting where stone meets stone. It's not unpleasant, just honest, like the room knows too much. The homeowner, a tall man with boots older than your phone, explains that the cellar's perfect for dairy because the temperature barely shifts. It holds steady through summer, through blizzards, through moods. No fancy insulation, just thick stone and centuries of compressed soil. Nature does the job, he says. I just turn the wheels. You run your hand along the wall. It's slick and cool. Your fingertips come away with a hint of lichen and something like beeswax. It's not dirty, it's seasoned. In fact, that's the main advantage of this vertically layered lifestyle. The microclimates that develop in each tier. Warmth rises, so upper floors remain cozy. But down here, under 2 generations of flooring and 1,000 dinners worth of dropped soup, it stays cold and damp year-round, perfect for food storage, wine, and the occasional sentimental breakdown. Scientists still argue over whether this old cellars are the product of architectural intent or happy accident. Did the original builders know they were creating ideal cheese bunkers? Or did they just build low because the wind was rude and they didn't want to dig too far uphill? As usual, the truth is probably both. But there's no question that these spaces have adapted beautifully. You might pass a doorway thinking it leads to storage and find yourself in a preserved 16th century salting room. Salt marks still etch the corners. Hooks still hang from beams once used to dry meats, or occasionally trousers that didn't make it through the winter. There's a quiet respect for decay in these homes, not in a Gothic way, more like, if something still works, even a little, you keep it. A cracked floor tile becomes a story. A damp wall becomes a useful cooling unit. Mold is not always an enemy. It's sometimes an ingredient. And that scent, that complex, nose-tingling, oddly nostalgic mix of wood smoke, mushroom, and what might be old wool, that's the smell of time. Some call it alpine perfume. Others call it the reason we installed a second door. Either way, it sticks with you. The quirky part? No 2 cellars smell the same. Some lean heavily toward mushroom. Others hint at iron and old potatoes. Some are faintly metallic, as though time left its cutlery behind. One even had a top note of honey, because, as the owner explained, a distant relative once used the space to keep bees underground for warmth. You pass through an arched doorway, ducking instinctively. The ceiling is low here, barely shoulder height. Not because people were shorter, but because the floor above was added hastily after the roof collapsed during a 1927 snowstorm. No one wanted to lose the cheese room, so instead of removing rubble, they compressed it. The result? A room that hums faintly when you breathe in too hard. And that chimney? It begins here, strangely, in what is now the basement, but what was once the roofline of an earlier home. You can trace it upward through generations of bricks and patched mortar. It curves in odd places, like it's trying to dodge memories. And eventually, it emerges triumphantly through the roof, still puffing, still warm. You might wonder, standing here in this cold, fragrant pocket of history, why anyone would keep using such a space. Why not fill it in, modernize, start fresh? But that's not how things work here. The past isn't erased, it's absorbed, reassigned, reimagined. This isn't a cellar, it's a palimpsest, a page overwritten but never truly scrubbed. There's a warmth in that, ironically enough, a kind of quiet promise that even the dark, damp places still have value, that even old stone can offer shelter, flavor, and a place to rest things that need time. Above your head, you hear footsteps, faint, muffled. Someone's walking across the kitchen floor. It creaks with a sound that echoes slightly down into this room, a reminder that you're still below something living, something layered, something ongoing. One local family swears they can hear the cellar breathe on stormy nights. Not groan, not creak. Breathe. Like the walls remember every winter and exhale slowly, as if to say, "Don't worry, I've held you through worse." And honestly, you believe it. You step back into the daylight, blinking, the chill still clinging to your skin like velvet fog. Above, the house continues, bright and warm and full of life. But below, under your very feet, the cool heart of the home still pulses, fermented, forgotten by modernity, but never unloved. You step out from the cellar into the sun again, blinking against the sharp contrast. Your eyes adjust slowly, and so does your understanding. Because now, you begin to notice something even stranger than stacked rooms and shifting floors. The chimney, for example, it starts in the attic. Yes, you read that right. You're in a home where the chimney, by all logical standards, should start somewhere near the base of the building. But here, it begins above the old living space, brick emerging from plank, like a tree growing from the roof of another tree. You look up, follow its path, and it gets weirder. It zigzags, it leans, it widens halfway up and narrows again near the top like someone built it on a dare. And that's when it hits you. This house isn't built from the bottom up. It's built from the past up. You're inside a structure that's been rebuilt on top of itself so many times, even the functional elements have lost track of where they started. And it's not just chimneys. Staircases stop mid-air. Doors open to sheer drops. Beams support nothing but nostalgia. This, my friend, is what happens when a house forgets it's a house and becomes a stratigraphic monument to compromise. One homeowner invites you into their sitting room, which used to be the upper floor of a stable. Not even joking. The wooden ceiling bears faint hoof marks, evidence of panicked goats during an avalanche in 1882. The family kept the beams, polished them, and now they frame a room with velvet curtains and a widescreen TV mounted slightly askew because the wall bows inward like it's remembering a bad year. Modern appliances hum gently beside stone walls laid in 1721. An espresso machine perches atop a hand-carved sideboard originally used for storing onions. The refrigerator nestles into an alcove that used to hold kindling and, according to legend, a small, deeply judgmental dog. The walls are irregular, but no one minds. That's part of the charm, and also part of the challenge. Building vertically on the ruins of older structures means nothing is square. The result? Rooms that feel cozy because they have to be. Hallways that snake. Staircases that spiral as though trying to escape the house entirely. One attic-turned bedroom features a window that opens directly into the back of another house 3 feet away. Not because someone made a mistake, but because that house used to be an outhouse, and now it's a guest room. Evolution. Alpine style. Mainstream architects might call it a planning nightmare, but here they just call it home. Scientists still argue over how such buildings remain standing. Structural engineers sketch diagrams, shake their heads, and quietly move to flatter countries. Yet the homes endure, propped up by thick stone, timber crossbeams, and pure alpine stubbornness. One of the most confounding features is what villagers affectionately refer to as floating chimneys. These are stacks that rise not from a hearth, but from an in-between space. Once, they served a lower floor that no longer exists, or that's been rebranded as a cellar. Now they begin in what's technically the second or third floor, and carry smoke from a fireplace retrofitted into what was, 100 years ago, an attic bedroom. You climb a creaky staircase, 4 steps up, 3 sideways, and find yourself in a room where the floor slopes away like a melting cake. There's a fireplace in the corner. It's small, almost bashful, tucked into a niche made of ancient red brick. The chimney above is clearly added later, its joints misaligned, like they were assembled in a hurry, or by someone distracted by goats. And yet, it works. The fire burns clean. The room is warm. The cat, curled on the windowsill, purrs in agreement. This is what adaptation looks like. Not sleek, not elegant, but persistent. A kind of domestic improvisation jazz. The quirky part? Many families name their chimneys. Yes, really, there's Old Joseph, who smokes a little to the left, and Tall Marie, who groans when the temperature drops below freezing. One elderly woman shows you her chimney, Fat Hans, which she claims has survived 6 earthquakes, 2 renovations, and a small kitchen fire that took out most of the original floor. He's a keeper, she says, patting it fondly. Because the thing is, these homes are personalities, not just structures. They've grown, layer by layer, like family members that stretch a little every year. And when you live with a house that remembers everything, you learn to speak its language. A door that sticks. Humidity's high. Rain is coming. A creak in the floorboards near the old staircase. Someone's shoes are wet. A gust from the chimney during dinner. The wind is shifting south. Better cover the firewood. You pause in a narrow hallway between floors. A wooden beam runs across the ceiling at an angle so sharp it looks like an accident. But it's original. One of the only surviving pieces from the earliest home on this site. A shepherd's hut from the 1600s. The beam was too solid to remove, so it stayed. Now it serves as a kind of mid-air handshake between centuries. That's how homes function here. Not linear, but layered, a structure where centuries live side by side, sharing vents, chimneys, and sometimes even secrets. And then there are the staircases. Oh, the staircases. One family added so many staircases over the years, after each rebuild, remodel, and floor rearrangement, that their home has 9 different stair segments. One leads nowhere. One connects 2 closets. One is used only during festivals, when a distant cousin insists on accessing his proper room. You climb a few steps now, duck beneath a beam that smells faintly of smoke and something older, rosemary, leather, rain, and you emerge in a room with slanted walls, a sloped ceiling, and a view that makes you forget all the tilting. Because beyond that small window is the snow-covered mountain, patient, watching. You imagine someone, long ago, standing in the same spot, same slope, same view, different fire. And now, you're the one warming your hands above the old bricks, listening to the chimney hum. Above ruins, below history, inside a home that doesn't know where it begins anymore. You wake up the next morning on the top floor of your host's house. If top still means anything in a place where floors are philosophical. The ceiling slopes low, wooden beams running across it like ribs, and the window beside your bed offers a wide, dizzying view of the village below. But there's something odd about that view. As you squint down at the winding paths and clustered rooftops, you notice something that doesn't quite compute. The houses are climbing, but not up the hillsides. They're climbing on top of themselves. From this vantage, it's clear the village is rising, slowly and unevenly, like a loaf of bread forgetting it's in the oven. It's not that the mountain is sinking. It's that the street level is rising, and no one's doing anything to stop it. You make your way down a twisting staircase, through 3 architectural time zones, and step out into the crisp air. The road ahead feels like a wave. It climbs, it dips, it flattens, it rises again, and not gently either. Some doors are now perched several feet above the street, with awkward stone steps climbing up to meet them. Others have their doorknobs brushing the dirt. There's no consistent level, because there's no consistent history. In the village square, you see what looks like a door, just barely peeking above the earth, like a memory trying to surface. It's half buried, sealed with mortar, and flanked by a pair of bent iron hinges. You ask a passing resident what it used to be. They shrug. Maybe a tailor shop, or a stable, or the bakery. Who knows anymore? There's a sort of relaxed amnesia about these things, because as the village rebuilt again and again, it stopped worrying about symmetry. Instead, it accepted the rise. The floors went higher. The windows changed position. The streets adjusted with polite indifference. And the result? A place where elevation is personal. Scientists still debate whether this vertical drift is more human-caused than natural. Some blame centuries of rubble layering. Others suggest frost heaving or soil creep. But the villagers themselves, they just point at a crooked house and say, "That one's tall because Otto liked a view." One particularly fascinating home has a front door accessible only by ladder. The original entry was buried after a 19th century landslide. The next generation installed a new door 1 floor up. Then the great-grandchildren, when the road rose again, added a third. Now, the house has 3 doors, like a fairy tale, but with more tax paperwork. And those roads? They're not roads anymore. They're ribbons of decisions, paved directly over roofs, courtyards, and sometimes even gravestones. A simple stroll through the village becomes an uphill puzzle. Where should the path go? Wherever the last guy left it. This brings us to the odd phenomenon of the sunken floor effect. Many homes now sit so far below the current street that their ground floors have become basements by accident. A bakery you visited yesterday, once bustling on the main street in 1820, now requires visitors to duck through a stone archway and descend 2 steps. The owner's not fussed. The bread still rises, she says. Why shouldn't the street? You might think this is the point where people would intervene, call a council, propose a leveling project, maybe start a GoFundMe for cobblestone realignment. But no, the villagers simply adapt. They slap up new stairs. They reroute drainage. They shrug. Because here, rising ground isn't a problem. It's a condition. There's a small church at the edge of the square. You walk toward it, drawn by the toll of its bell, only to realize something's off. The door is low. Too low. The ground outside seems higher than it should be. You crouch slightly and step inside. The air shifts. Cooler, older, slightly floral. And there it is. The original church floor lies more than a meter below your current feet. It's been preserved, barely touched, like a shrine within a shrine. You're walking on a raised wooden platform now, built decades ago to accommodate the newer street level. Beneath that, stone tiles worn smooth by centuries of prayers, now visible only through a plexiglass viewing window beside the altar. Why not just excavate the whole thing, you ask? The priest smiles. Because people are taller now, and the church isn't going anywhere. Quirky, isn't it? That the buildings remain still while everything else climbs. Even the trees here seem to lean a little, as if trying to match the new altitude of the homes beside them. Garden walls have awkward extensions. Fences show signs of having been lifted, like teenage jeans pulled up too late. In some homes, residents have had to add entire flights of stairs inside their entryways just to connect to the new ground floor. One family repurposed an old wardrobe as a vertical hallway. Open the doors, climb the steps inside, and emerge at street level, like a magician pulling yourself out of a drawer. There's no central plan, no blueprint, just an organic evolution of elevation. And it's not just vertical, it's emotional. The houses rise because the people rise, because each generation adds its layer, not just in timber and stone, but in the way they interact with the place. They cook different food, hang different curtains, leave different marks in the dust, but they don't erase what came before. They just step on it gently, with the full knowledge that someday someone will be stepping on them too. As you wander through a back alley, half tunnel, half shortcut, you come across a painted stone set into a retaining wall, a faded name, a date, 1738, a reminder that what looks like a hill may be someone's roof from long ago. You climb one last flight of external stairs to reach a modern home built atop what was once a tavern. The owner greets you with a laugh, waving away your confusion. "Don't worry," he says, handing you a mug of hot something. Everyone gets lost their first week. The village adjusts upward. You sip, watching the rooftops shimmer below, imagining the older rooftops buried even deeper beneath. Somewhere, 3 floors down and 4 generations back, someone lit a fire, and now here you are, standing on the smoke that rose from it. The church bell chimes again as the sun shifts lower, casting long blue shadows over the rooftops. You wander downhill, well, technically downward, though the slope is so irregular you begin to wonder if you're just going in circles. Your feet eventually lead you to a modest chapel, tucked into a nook between 2 taller houses that seem to lean in protectively on either side. You push open the heavy wooden door, expecting to walk straight into the nave. Instead, you walk down. Several steep steps descend into the gloom, each one carved from the same pale stone as the chapel walls. The air shifts as you descend, growing cooler, heavier. The light from outside fades, and when you reach the bottom step, you realize you're underground, or at least it feels like it. But here's the twist. You're not in a crypt. You're in the main sanctuary. Because this chapel, like so much else in the village, was overtaken by rising ground. When it was built in the 15th century, it stood proudly at street level. Parishioners would stroll in on flat flagstones, leave candles burning, and gossip outside while the bells rang for Mass. Today, the ground floor is nearly 2 meters higher. Outside, what used to be walls are now retaining walls. The stained glass windows, only visible from the inside. From the outside, they look like colorful skylights buried in ivy. Inside, it's cool and hushed. The altar glows faintly from a small overhead lamp. You run your hand along the wall, feeling the pockmarks of age. And when you look toward the ceiling, you notice the roof is only a few feet above your head. That's not how chapels are supposed to feel. Compressed, crouched. It's like the building has been lowered into the earth, even though it hasn't moved an inch. The ceiling just didn't follow the street up. You take a seat on a creaky bench and try to imagine a time when this room opened directly onto the world. When the bell tower above marked the highest point in town. Now, it's flanked by 3-story homes built on generations of rubble and reconstruction. The bell tower itself looks modest, squat, almost apologetic. A priest passes by, broom in hand. He nods politely and mentions that they considered raising the floor once, but realized they'd lose the ceiling fresco in the process. And that's the dilemma, isn't it? How do you update a building without erasing it? How do you respect the elevation of today without burying the purpose of yesterday? Scientists still debate the best approach to architectural conservation in cases like this. Some recommend razing ancient structures entirely. Others suggest cutting into the rising ground to re-expose foundations. A few just give up and recommend interpretive signage. But in this village, they've made a different choice. They leave it be. You climb the steps again and emerge blinking into the light. Across the square, you spot another religious structure. This one, a small shrine pressed into the side of a house. It used to be freestanding, but was absorbed over time as neighboring homes were expanded and raised. Now, the shrine stands below eye level, tucked into what looks like a basement nook, complete with a gutter running above its roofline. And yet, fresh flowers sit there. A candle glows. Someone has left a handwritten prayer, folded in 4, wedged into the crevice beside a chipped ceramic saint. The street may have risen, but reverence hasn't vanished. It's just learned to crouch a little. You continue walking. noticing now how many religious sites in the village have suffered the same fate. Floor plans warped by elevation shifts, chapels with entrances 3 stairs below the sidewalk, baptismal fonts sitting awkwardly in corners that used to be central. In one case, an entire bell tower leans into the hillside like it's eavesdropping on eternity. The quirky bit? Some churches embrace the elevation. They built new entrances, arched and grand, on the new ground floor, while preserving the old sanctuary below. A few even developed a tiered approach to worship. High Mass upstairs, quiet prayer downstairs. There's one particularly strange example. A church that now has 2 altars, one from the 1600s in the buried level, and one from the 1970s installed directly above it. The priest refers to them as the heaven floor and the earth floor. Depending on the time of year and how many stairs the congregation is willing to climb, they alternate services between the two. You walk past this church just as the bell rings again, clear, low, and resonant. It echoes between the uneven rooftops like a conversation between centuries. Nearby, an old man tends to a tiny patch of flowers that seem to bloom sideways from the edge of a stairwell. He explains, without prompting, that the flower bed sits directly over what was once the town's original bell ringer's cottage. Buried, he says, tapping the soil with his trowel, but not gone. And that really is the whole ethos here. Nothing is gone. It's just below. Below the new kitchens, below the grocery shop, below the courtyard with the slightly off-kilter fountain that everyone walks past without noticing that it used to be the center of everything. You pass by a narrow door, half-height, embedded in a wall that's clearly been replastered a dozen times. Above it, the faded carving of a date, 1524, no longer in use, but no one's removed it. It's too far below the walkway now. Instead, they hang flower pots from its frame, as if to say, "Thanks for your service." Above it, a new door. And above that, a new window. And still the bells ring, rising, just like everything else. Later that evening, as the sky purples and the first stars flicker above the peaks, you find yourself wandering once more, this time through a maze of back alleys, cobbled in places and dirt-packed in others. You follow a path that was once a proper lane, now half buried and curved like a spine. And then you see it, a small, partially open door, leaning crookedly in its frame, barely 4 feet high. Not a front entrance, not even a real room. This is one of the old basements that used to be ground floors. A curious architectural time capsule. The owners call it the underneath. You stoop and slip inside. The air changes immediately, cooler, denser, laced with the scent of damp stone and pine resin. Your eyes adjust to a soft amber glow, cast by a bulb that hums like a contented wasp. You take a step, and the floor creaks under your weight. Not because it's flimsy, but because it remembers. You're standing in a room with no clear purpose anymore. It used to be something. A bakery, maybe, or a storeroom, or a meeting place for people who like secrets. Now, it's just there. The walls are stone, pocked and irregular, patched in at least 4 different ways by 4 different centuries. The ceiling sags ever so slightly in the middle, bowing under the weight of the family living room above. A dusty side door leads to a crawl space, barely taller than a cat. You duck in, hands brushing both walls, and find yourself surrounded by the detritus of long forgotten eras. A broken plow blade, a rusted oil lamp, a basket with no bottom, a child's wooden shoe, tiny, scuffed, and oddly modern looking. This was once a fully functional room. Now, it's just shadow history. The strange part is, no one really uses these spaces anymore. They're inconvenient, too low, too damp, too haunted by disuse. But no one demolishes them either. Because you don't erase a room that was once someone's everything. You step over it, literally and metaphorically. And in this village, those unused rooms often connect. A tunnel here, a doorway there. You'll hear rumors about people discovering entire networks of old rooms under their homes, cobbled corridors linking multiple properties. Some date back to when this was a tiny medieval outpost. Others might be older still. Their walls scorched by forgotten fires, marked with initials long unreadable. Scientists still argue whether these subterranean paths were originally escape tunnels, trade routes, or just the alpine version of a bad floor plan. Locals simply say, we were cold and we were practical. And cold they were. One man tells you about a room beneath his cousin's house, accessible only by lifting a trapdoor in the pantry. It's filled with empty wine bottles and crumbling paper bags from the 1950s. When they cleared the space to install a heat pump, they found a fireplace, perfectly intact, built into the corner of what used to be someone's bedroom, now entirely underground. That fireplace still works. The family uses it on holidays. You wander deeper into the undervillage. The further you go, the stranger it gets. One room has a painted ceiling, faint floral motifs in ochre and green. It would have been lovely in its time. Today, it feels surreal, like a ballroom in a forgotten dream. Another room has a tiny window, now blocked entirely by soil and roots. It was once someone's view. Now it's a wall. You begin to notice the layered textures. Stone gives way to brick. Brick gives way to timber. Timber gives way to what can only be described as stubborn optimism. Each rebuild didn't erase the old material. It adapted it. New walls were built directly against old ones, sometimes onto them. It's not unusual to see a 19th century beam nailed into a 14th century corner joint. And then there are the quirks. A small archway painted red. A brick floor that suddenly ends in an open pit. A water spigot inexplicably embedded halfway up a wall. The kind of architectural decisions that could only be made by people dealing with collapsing ceilings and freezing winters in the same breath. But the strangest moment comes when you accidentally open the wrong door. You think you're heading toward a back stairwell. Instead, you step into a preserved bakery, or at least what remains of one. The oven's mouth yawns dark and soot-stained. Shelves line the far wall, still holding clay pots, now fused to their boards by age and neglect. A broom rests in the corner, brittle and unbothered. This space was sealed off after the street rose and rerouted foot traffic above it. No one had a reason to come down here anymore, and yet it still smells faintly of flour, of warm stone, of heat long since spent. Above your head, footsteps echo softly. Someone's in the kitchen, making tea, watching television, living. You're down here, wrapped in the past. And it's not spooky, not exactly, just still. This is the unintentional museum that lies beneath alpine villages, a labyrinth of left-behind rooms, not because anyone forgot them, but because life simply rose above them. Most of these crawl spaces and cellars aren't mapped. No tourist brochures, no glossy signage. They exist in memory and the occasional municipal sketch. scrawled by someone who's probably still alive and deeply suspicious of computers. The people here understand their homes not as isolated buildings, but as vertical stacks of lives. Grandparents, great-grandparents, unnamed builders. They all left something behind, not in a sentimental way, in a practical architectural way. A wall, a window, a footpath that's now a shelf. And while the upper floors get Wi-Fi and modern plumbing, the lower levels stay exactly as they are, crumbly, quiet, essential. So as you emerge back into the main level, blinking and a little dusty, you feel it in your chest. This village doesn't move on from the past. It just builds above it. Like soil layering over roots, like snow layering over slate, like memory compacted into stone. You're outside again, wandering past what looks like a crumbling wall. But as with most things here, it's not quite what it seems. The wall used to be a house, or rather, part of one, a fragment of a room that once held a bed, or a table, or someone's Monday morning. You can still see the outline of a window, long sealed up, bricked in, forgotten. The shutter hinges are rusted and frozen in time, but they're there, silent witnesses to a view that no longer exists. These are what the locals call ghost doors and window bones. They're everywhere, a strange patchwork of architectural remains embedded in the new. Old outlines, preserved like fossils in stone. A door that opens to solid wall. A staircase that rises to meet nothing but sky. A pair of shutters perfectly intact, nailed shut, over a bricked-in square, hanging on the side of a building with no room behind it. At first, you think it's mistake, a poorly planned remodel. But then you realize this is intentional. Because here in the Alps, when a house outlives one of its features, they don't erase the evidence. They just seal it off and build around it, or on top of it, or both. The result is a village where walls seem to whisper about former selves, where every building is like a palimpsest, a manuscript written and rewritten, but never fully erased. One particularly striking home has a half door about 10 feet up its side. No stairs, no platform, just a solitary door, set into the plaster like a portal to thin air. The owner laughs when you ask about it. That was my grandmother's front entrance, she says. The road used to run up there. Now it doesn't. Now it runs below, 2 meters down, paved over the rooftops of forgotten cellars and crawl spaces. You walk along a side alley and spot another sealed window, barely 3 bricks wide, painted over in soft blue. It looks decorative, almost charming. But then you notice a tiny wrought iron handle below the sill. This wasn't a decoration. It was a serving hatch, once used to hand food to passers-by or allow gossip to escape in small, polite bursts. Now, it's just texture, memory trapped in mortar. Scientists still argue whether preserving these ghost features serves any structural purpose. Is it reinforcement, sentimentality, or just the path of least resistance? Local masons say it's both. You don't rip out a 300-year-old beam if it's still doing its job. You don't remove a window if it doesn't leak. You simply move the inside somewhere else. The villagers treat these relics with a kind of amused reverence. They'll point out the boarded-up balcony 3 stories above your head and say, "That was my uncle's favorite smoking spot before the garden ate it." The garden didn't eat it, of course. The garden is now 2 floors higher, built atop what used to be a roofline. The quirky part? Some people actually decorate their ghost doors. Not ironically either. They hang wreaths from doorknobs that lead nowhere, drape garlands over sealed arches. One man has a framed photo of his bricked-in kitchen window from 1910, proudly displayed beside the bricks. It's not about nostalgia. It's about acknowledgement, about remembering that these spaces used to be real, used to breathe, used to matter, and sometimes they still do. In one particularly lovely courtyard, a woman uses an old window frame, no glass, no room behind it, as a bookshelf. It's built into the exterior wall of what was once a summer kitchen. She keeps gardening books there, and old keys, and one cracked ceramic owl that seems perpetually unimpressed. These remnants don't just stick around, they become functional again, repurposed in quiet, surprising ways. One sealed window is now a shadow box, filled with pressed flowers behind a pane of glass. Another old door, nailed shut in the 1800s, now holds a mosaic made from shards of pottery found in the soil beneath the house. A child's drawing hangs crookedly on a surface that was, once upon a time, the entry to someone's daily life. There's something strangely comforting in the way the village lets these features stay. Not for tourists, not for postcards, but because removal feels rude. These aren't ruins, they're witnesses. You pass a home that's had 4 roofs in its time. The current one sits proudly on top, fresh slate and iron ridge flashing, catching the evening sun. But just beneath the eaves, you spot the arch of an older roofline, lower, simpler, now half embedded in the attic wall. A curved ghost, sleeping beneath its replacement. And lower still, if you know where to look, a tiny triangular vent, carved into the stone, the kind once used to keep haylofts from going musty. It now opens into a bedroom closet. The house hasn't changed shape, the ground did. There's a theory among architectural historians that alpine villages represent a unique model of layered resilience, not just rebuilding, but compounding over time. A refusal to discard the old, even when it's inconvenient. A cultural logic that says, we are not above our past. We are standing directly on it. Even modern renovations embrace this idea. One couple opened a new cafe in what was once a tanner's shop. Instead of stripping the walls, they framed the old hooks and rusted tools and glass panels right there beside the espresso machine. The ceiling beams, blackened by centuries of smoke. The floor, sloped slightly because it used to be an exterior ramp. Patrons sip cappuccinos while seated in what used to be a curing room. Nobody minds. In fact, they kind of love it, because every sealed window, every boarded door, every crooked wall is a reminder. This place didn't just survive, it accumulated, and there's beauty in accumulation. In the odd shadows it casts, in the ways the past sticks out like elbows under a too tight sweater. So the next time you see a door that leads nowhere, don't ask why they haven't torn it down. Ask who once stood in that doorway, looking out over a village that hadn't yet risen, and what they saw that made them build in the first place. By now, your feet know the village as well as your eyes do. They've memorized the angles of uneven staircases, the tilt of cobblestones, the soft give of centuries beneath them. And so, you barely stumble as you step into the next house. Though it's hard to call it just a house, it's something else entirely. Because the man who owns this particular building isn't just a resident. He's an accidental archaeologist. You wouldn't know it from the outside. The facade is tidy, freshly plastered, with cheerful window boxes and a well-oiled door that opens on the first try. Inside, the floorboards gleam. The furniture is modern, tasteful. Everything hums with quiet, civilized normalcy. But then he lifts the rug, literally. Beneath it lies a trap door, not hidden, not dramatic, just a square of wood with a rope handle. He pulls it open and invites you down a narrow wooden ladder. And suddenly, you're not in the 21st century anymore. You're in a room from 1407, complete with rough stone walls, a partial hearth carved directly into the granite, and a set of tools rusted into their final positions. There's a wooden bench against one wall, worn, splintered, but still holding on. The air smells of cold iron and something sweeter, almost herbal. Sage, lavender, memory. He explains, casually, that this was the original foundation of the house. It was buried after a flood in the 1600s, then built over again and again until it vanished beneath what is now 2 floors of careful domesticity. When he started renovating, he thought he'd found an old wine cellar. Then he discovered coinage, silver, flat, stamped with the crest of a long-dead duke. Then came a collapsed doorway, then a partial tiled floor, then the mural. Yes, the mural. It's faint, barely legible in the flickering bulb light, but unmistakably there. A painted frieze running along the upper wall. Stylized animals, strange flowers, what looks like a sun with a face. No one knows exactly what it meant. Was it decorative? Religious? The work of an artistic child? Theories abound. None of them matter. It's beautiful. He's preserved it all, not behind glass or velvet ropes, but with quiet respect. He didn't seal it off. He just keeps it swept. A few friends have been down here, one historian, a handful of mildly impressed cats. The room isn't on any map. There's no plaque. But here it is, a medieval chamber beneath a modern dining room, lit by string lights and reverence. And it's not the only one. All across the village, ordinary people are finding extraordinary things beneath their homes. You talk to a woman who discovered a cache of iron nails and what she's fairly certain was a tool for branding livestock. Another man unearthed a tiled floor while digging a new septic line. He'd assumed it was trash until a visiting archaeologist nearly fainted with excitement. One family pulled up a warped section of parquet flooring and found a Roman oil lamp, blackened but intact, resting just beneath a sheet of crumbling plaster. Scientists still debate how best to approach these casual excavations. On one hand, they represent priceless historical insight. On the other, they're under someone's couch. There's no funding, no teams of experts, just grandmothers with garden trowels and kids poking around with flashlights. Some villagers keep their discoveries quiet, worried about bureaucracy. Others take photos, send them off to regional archives, then carefully rebury the items where they found them. It's theirs, one woman shrugs. I'm just borrowing the top floor. The quirky part? A few houses have so many relics under them that their owners have set up tiny personal museums. One couple turned an old sheep room into a display gallery. On uneven wooden shelves, they've arranged pottery fragments, medieval nails, a crucifix carved from cherry wood, and several unidentifiable objects that look like cursed pasta. The whole thing is lit by fairy lights and smells faintly of cinnamon. There's no admission fee, but you're welcome to leave a coin in the bowl, just like the Romans might have. These aren't grand archaeological digs. They're archaeological cohabitations, lives layered so tightly together that the past keeps bumping into the present, usually during home repairs. And the villagers are used to it. You pass a man repainting his guest room and ask about a strange stone protruding from the wall. That's the old bakery's corner post, he says, without even pausing. We don't remove it. The cat likes it. You stop by the new butcher shop, sleek and bright, where the floor is cut away in one corner to reveal a section of old Roman paving. Customers glance at it, mildly impressed, before returning to their sausages. Another shop displays 18th century roof tiles in its window, unearthed during a recent plumbing catastrophe and now repurposed as candle holders. And in nearly every house, the owners speak about their finds, not with pride, exactly, but with inheritance, as if each object, each structure, is part of a slow, generational conversation. Even the children know the drill. One boy, maybe 10, shows you his treasure box. A rusted spoon, a bent nail, a shard of blue and white porcelain, and what might be an ancient buckle. We think this was from the big flood, he says, eyes wide, or from a king. The truth doesn't matter so much. What matters is that it was there, beneath them, waiting. So the next time you wonder where history lives, remember, sometimes it's not behind velvet ropes. It's not in display cases or textbook diagrams. Sometimes it's under a rug, in a root cellar, wrapped in the walls like a secret folded into a love letter. And sometimes it's right beneath your bed, whispering, "Don't forget me." By now, you're beginning to understand something important. This village doesn't just look old. It feels layered, not just in architecture, but in attitude. And tonight, as you settle beside a crackling fire in the corner of a living room that used to be someone's goat pen, a quiet question surfaces. Why don't they just move? Why keep adding floor after floor, patching roof after roof, preserving staircases that lead to nowhere, and door frames you have to duck through like a guilty time traveler? Why keep living on top of the mess, generation after generation? The answer isn't on a map. It's in the people. You talk to an old woman peeling apples with a knife so worn it's more suggestion than blade. Her family has lived in the same house since 1784. She's slept in the same room her great-grandmother did, just one floor higher. The original room is now a storage closet. The old fireplace, sealed, too smoky, but still visible through a square cut in the plaster. We didn't want to forget it was there, she says. It still has its teeth. This isn't just about stubbornness, though let's be honest, there's plenty of that too. It's about continuity. The homes are not just shelter, they're participants. They've watched births, weathered floods, absorbed sorrow, celebrated weddings. To leave them would be to leave a witness behind. Scientists studying settlement patterns call it site loyalty. It's a global phenomenon. Humans often return to, or refuse to leave, certain plots of land, even when the logical thing would be to pack up and head elsewhere. But here, in the Alps, that loyalty gets structural. It's baked into the way buildings lean, the way stairs are added instead of floors removed. It's there in the uneven thresholds and ghost doors and garden walls built from 6 different centuries of rock. This isn't a village that renews itself. It accretes, like coral, or memory foam, or your granddad's attic. The quirky part? Even when people leave, when they move to the city, chase jobs, or seek milder winters, they rarely sell. The house stays in the family. It waits, quietly. Maybe the shutters sag. Maybe the roofline curls like a tired eyebrow. But the home remembers, and it expects someone will return. One man tells you his house sat empty for 17 years before he came back to it. He found mouse nests in the pantry and a sapling growing through the back window. Still, he didn't tear it down. He cleaned, patched, built a new kitchen above the old one, left the cracked tiles in place. It didn't want to be new, he says. It just wanted to be lived in again. There's a practical angle to all this, too. In the Alps, building land is rare. Flat spots are precious, often protected, and hauling materials up steep slopes is a special kind of self-punishment. Rebuilding on the same footprint makes sense, even when that footprint is now a kind of archaeological dig. And then there's the emotional side. You can't measure it exactly, but you feel it when someone shows you. The crossbeam their grandfather carved initials into, right after the war. Or when a family proudly points out the dent in the kitchen wall, made when someone threw a ladle in 1913 and no one ever fixed it. It's part of the seasoning, they say, grinning. You visit a small inn where the rooms are stacked like uneven pancakes. Each level has a different floor height, different windows, different heat distribution. The owner shows you where the original floor used to be, now 3 feet beneath the front desk. There's a chunk of wall exposed behind a glass pane, revealing 4 distinct layers of plaster, each a different color. We left it open, he says. Tourists like to guess which century their room is sitting on. And it's not just the homes. It's the streets, the fountains, the benches carved into retaining walls, now half submerged by centuries of elevation. One street lamp is mounted on what used to be a second-floor balcony. Now it lights a sidewalk. You might think this whole system would be fragile, teetering under the weight of tradition. But it's the opposite. It's resilient. When something breaks, they don't call a demolition crew. They fix it, or cover it, or build another layer on top. It's a kind of architectural composting. Mainstream city planning has no clue what to do with this kind of evolution. There are no blueprints, no master plans, just generations of decisions stacked like winter coats in a hallway. And yet, it works. Because in the end, the village isn't resisting modernity. It's digesting it at its own pace, with its own rules. Sure, someone might install solar panels, but they'll still use the 200-year-old wooden rake stored in the barn out back. Yes, there's Wi-Fi, but the router sits on a table that once held a butter churn. You step into one last home for the evening. The front door is new, fresh paint, smooth hinges, but the threshold is worn to a gentle dip, smoothed by thousands of feet. Inside, the light is warm. The kitchen smells like stew. A teenager scrolls through her phone, sprawled on a couch that rests on floorboards from 1769. You ask her if she ever thinks about the fact that her bedroom sits atop 3 other versions of her house. She shrugs. Kinda weird, but cool, like sleeping in a lasagna. And maybe that's the best summary of all. This village is a lasagna of time, layered, uneven, deliciously complicated. You don't throw it away just because one noodle is cracked. You savor it, mess and all. Snow begins to fall, just as you leave that last house. Fat, lazy flakes drifting down in spirals that make the air feel like a snow globe someone's gently shaken. The rooftops glisten, and smoke begins curling from chimneys, some straight, some twisted, some emerging from halfway up walls that have long forgotten where their fireplaces used to be. And you climb. Not a steep ascent, just a steady slope through switchback alleys and uneven steps. You're heading to the highest point in the village, which, amusingly, is not the top of the mountain, but the roofline of a house that now rises higher than the church bell tower itself. This home, perched atop several layers of past life, quite literally touches the past. It began as a one-story shepherd's hut, sometime in the late 1600s. Then came the additions: a barn, a second floor, a guest room. Then the barn became the kitchen. Then the second floor became a cellar. Then another floor was built, and another, and then the street rose, and the ground rose, and the family kept building, kept layering, kept going up. Now, the roof you stand on, it's 5 stories above the original foundation, though no one in the village calls it a 5-story house. To them, it's just Anya's place. The view is unbelievable. Below, the village rolls like a crooked quilt of eaves and cobbled paths. Beyond that, fields and fir trees, icy and still. The mountains loom, dusted white, ancient and unmoved. But right here, right beneath your boots, you're standing on centuries of domestic sediment. And here's the most disorienting thing. It doesn't feel tall in the way city buildings do. It feels deep. You're not high above something. You're standing atop everything that came before you. Every roof that caved in. Every chimney that cracked. Every flood, every fire, every decision not to start fresh, but to simply raise the floor and try again. All of it's here, beneath you, compressed into a house that hums with the gravity of lived time. And yet it doesn't feel heavy. It feels quiet. Up here, the snow falls more softly. The wind is less biting. You see the faint glow of windows below, yellow rectangles puncturing the winter dimness. Somewhere, a dog barks, and someone answers in a language older than electricity. You sit, just for a moment. You let your fingers trail along the slate tiles of the newest roof, the latest lid on a very old jar. And you imagine what lies below. A bedroom, then a stairwell, then a forgotten parlor, then the pantry from a century ago, then a sealed root cellar, then perhaps the bones of someone's great-great-grandfather who once carved spoons and hated the cold. You picture each layer not as ruins, but as layers of care. Each one a solution, a compromise, a moment of resilience in timber and stone. Mainstream architecture is obsessed with fresh starts, clean slates, tear it down, build it better. But this village chose another way. Here, you build again on top of what already worked once. Not perfectly, not symmetrically, but earnestly. The quirky part? No one's counting how many times this process has repeated. It's not a race. It's not even really a story anyone tells with drama. It just is. People here don't say, "This was a Roman site." They say, "That's the old wall. Don't lean on it. It shifts in spring." They don't say, "This used to be a chapel." They say, "That's where the light's best at noon." Because what matters most isn't what the space was. It's what it still does. Keeps out wind, cooks a meal, holds a memory. You turn your gaze skyward. The stars are brighter now, a crisp, endless shimmer. You realize the snow has stopped. The air is still. So still, in fact, you can hear distant boots crunching below. Laughter in a hallway. the creak of another stair. The house beneath you doesn't sleep, it holds. And so you let your thoughts settle. You are a visitor here, a lucky guest standing atop a monument that never set out to be one. A place made not of marble, but of persistence. And as the village glows beneath your feet, tucked in for the night, you understand. This isn't a story about houses. It's a story about people who refused to move on, so they moved up. They built new lives over old ones, not to forget, but to remember in layers. And now you've walked those layers, slept in them, eaten in them, climbed through them, and they'll stay with you, right there, just beneath your feet. And now, as your eyes grow heavy and the night folds gently around your shoulders, let yourself drift back to that alpine rooftop. It's still there, quiet, steady, brushing against the cold sky, like it's always known how to hold the stars. Beneath it, the house hums in layers, rooms beneath rooms, lives beneath lives, warmth resting softly atop old stone. You're lying in a bed that's only the most recent version of itself. A mattress where once there was hay, where once there was floor, where once there was frost on timber that's now sealed deep below. And even further down, beyond the steps, beyond the hearth, beyond the sealed cellar doors, rests a stillness that has never left. The kind of stillness that comes not from silence, but from staying. Outside, snow gathers on slate, whispering against shutters, tucking the village into sleep like a mother, smoothing a quilt. The fire flickers once more, then settles into embers. The floor creaks, just slightly, as if sighing with you. Let your breath slow. Let your thoughts soften and sink, like footsteps disappearing into fresh snow. There's no hurry now, no need to climb. You've already made it. To the roof, to the root, to the heart of a place that builds not in leaps, but in layers. A place that doesn't forget. So rest easy. You are safe, held gently by centuries of care. Let the house carry you, floor by floor, memory by memory, down into dreams. Sweet dreams